Another byproduct of the battle to kill the bill was the proliferation of small-scale anti-government publications that were to appear in the run-up to the passing of the CJB. As well as the Freedom Network's own leaflets and flyers, a whole host of other related underground literature was to arrive on the street in the manner of the 17th century radical pamphlets that had previously manifested on the eve of the English Civil War, an all-new underground media that was to include my own earliest forays into the medium of radical filmmaking. One aspect of the advent of affordable broadcast standard video technology towards the end of the 1980s was the creation of a new wave of highly motivated radical filmmakers who were able to capitalise on the political undercurrents of the time, and whose work was to make its debut thanks to the organisers of the Cool Town's Go-Go Picture Show, one of the foremost film and video events of the early 1990s London avant-garde.
I did raves before, and it sort of comes out of that for me as well, because a rave is a place where you can exhibit things as well as dance, basically. So it's sort of a natural, for me it was a natural progression from that, and also from the fact that I made electronic music, and through that I got into using my computer for images, because I used the computer for music beforehand. And it's quite similar really, and when you have something to say, it really doesn't really matter what the medium is, because you always find ways of saying what you want to say, whether it's with music or with images.
For me, it's a progression from kind of my work in theatre and writing, and I progressed into films, and I suppose it's the theatricalness of it, and the way that what I don't like about the theatre is the proscenium arch, where the audience sit on one side and the performance happens on the other, and taking it into something like the Go-Go, where everything goes on all at once, and the audience are involved. It's like a kind of logical conclusion to that line of thinking.
The only action that has no effect is the action not taken. What effect do you want? What effect do you want? The only action that has no effect is the action not taken. What effect do you want? Run that by me again, run that by me again, run that by me again. The only action that has no effect is the action that is not taken. What effect do you want?
It's like, generally people are told what to do when they're being entertained. You know, it's like you're conditioned when you go to, for instance, when you go to the cinema. To go to the cinema, you buy your ticket, you go in, you buy your ice cream, sit down, eat your popcorn, and watch the film. And it's like you're made to sit down and you're made to watch the film. Whereas it's something like the Go-Go, if you don't fancy watching the film that you're watching, there's always something else that you can do. You can wander about and you can watch the film in the way that you want to watch it, and you can watch what is going on in the way that you want to watch it.
The Go-Go Picture Show was in many respects the epitome of everything that was to go on at the Cool Town during the early days at the height of the anti-CJB movement. The hands-on DIY community vibe of the entire setup at this totally unique and largely still unrivaled venue was to see the development of a whole myriad of completely original art forms that have really only recently touched the mainstream through internet sites such as YouTube. The appearance in high street electrical retailers of the first generation of semi-professional video and audio equipment, from hi-8 camcorders to professional Walkmans and the earliest digital audio tape machines, was to see a wave of high-quality street-level artistic expression that had never before been experienced by previous generations of partygoers. And it was to be through the medium of underground filmmaking more than any other that this first generation technical revolution was to have its greatest impact. as well as a whole army of lesser-known creative innovators who were to gravitate to the early rave scene and events like the Go-Go Picture Show, another group who could perhaps be described as some of the more successful of this new generation of filmmakers, who were to include the likes of Mark Saunders and the Duvet brothers, was to build up a comprehensive body of work which was to find its way into the media mainstream as a result of being broadcast on Channel 4, thus gaining for themselves the ears and eyes of a far wider audience whilst pushing the boundaries of their work ever further into the avant-garde.
Basically, we kind of got rid of the idea of a captive audience. It's like setting your audience free to wander around, and kind of by doing that you also enable them to think about what they're looking at differently, so that they can then realise that people in films are ordinary people, and the filmmakers who made the films at the Go-Go are there. And so it's not impressive, it's not alienated, it's no big deal. It's really, the point is, this is down to earth, and you can do it too, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, it's part of the DIY culture, I suppose. You know, that sort of, because of the, with the advent of all the technology that a lot of people have got access to, one way or another, a lot more people have access to making images and making them in a certain way, in a way that a lot of people can. You can put things from a cheap little video camera on TV nowadays, so it means that everyone has access to that medium a lot, and it's kind of the
democratisation.
Democratisation.
That's our word, we found it. Democratisation of art.
Yeah.
As for the Coultan Arts Centre, like Old Street Squatted Vicarage, the venue's principal role as a perceived threat to the powers that be, which was to make it such a moving target for Howard's overly draconian legislation, was its potential as a genuine alternative economic power base, completely independent of the corporate control of the supermarket chain mentality that has, in the intervening years, completely destroyed many small-town high streets to the detriment of economic diversity of any kind. Thus, the Conservative Party's war on the largely eco-oriented counterculture, and the green radical viewpoint in particular, can truly be seen for what it was, an economic war principally aimed at destroying the viability of any real carbon-neutral alternative to the financial power of the city. Here at the Coultan Arts Centre, this alternative economy was in its element, with its own propaganda mechanisms and underground distribution network, completely independent of the mainstream economy at large. This same economic motivation may well hold the key to the earliest suppression of the Stonehenge Free Festival under Margaret Thatcher almost a decade before. The Stonehenge Festival itself, not to mention the entire National Free Festival network that had sprung up around it, was to create its own alternative economy, completely independent and beyond the control of the corporate mainstream, while simultaneously manifesting a melting pot of radical, far-out and forward-thinking eco-oriented ideas, which are only now really being recognised for what they actually were, as global warming sets in and the polar ice caps begin to recede. It was here that ideas about putting theories about solar and wind power to some practical use were originally discussed and implemented, resulting in turn in the setting up of groups such as the Kingston Green Collective, whose annual green carbon neutral events were to make such a serious impact on many of those seeking a way out of dependence on fossil fuels during the 2 decades immediately following the destruction of the original Free Festival scene. And as the Church of England's commissioners speculated in property and played the money markets in sad futile mimicry of besooted Thatcherite property-obsessed yuppiedom, the Free Festival-inspired new paganism was to usher in a revival, eco-centric spirituality. When the inevitable crackdown came, it was to resemble in many ways the suppression of traditional folk customs by the victorious parliamentarian Puritans in the aftermath of the English Civil War. But in spite of the civil disturbances, Stonehenge is still a magnet for enthusiastic pagans, most notably at winter solstice. As well as the hounding, pursuit and wholesale destruction of the peace convoy, culminating in the bloody and brutal Battle of the Beanfield and the introduction of a summer solstice-long exclusion zone placed around the stones themselves, the establishment's attempt to destroy the ideas that the festival had come to represent was to fail completely, in spite of the fact that the Stonehenge People's Free Festival itself was to pass into the history books as yet another chapter in the battle for ideology and ideas, as the forces of freedom and oppression fight it out over and over again in their continual struggle for dominance. The cult of the now lost world to which it truly belongs has endured beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The oppressive and draconian methodology with which the festival was suppressed was to immortalise Stonehenge forever in the minds of those who were there, as well as many who weren't, no matter how trivial or peripheral their involvement with the scene of which it was the hub. The excessive use of police resources to snuff out a coming together of ideas, many of which are at last being recognised for the value of what they are by the creators of the ever more deadly cult of the car, can now be viewed in proper socio-historical perspective. But in spite of the fact that Stonehenge itself and nearby Avebury Ring have effectively been put off limits from the point of view of enacting a festival, both the stones themselves as well as many neighbouring sites across the whole of Wessex still act as a magnet for those of a pagan persuasion. And it is perhaps for this reason that the methodology employed by the government is still viewed by many as every bit as undemocratic as the Eastern Bloc dictatorships that the Tories themselves were to demonise so successfully through the medium of the self-same mass media propaganda mechanisms through which they were to denigrate Stonehenge. Thus, nowhere else is the oppressive conduct of both government and police alike seen for what it is than amongst the new waves of contemporary pagans that have sprung up since the 1960s and 70s in imitation of the early flowering of neo-paganism inspired by the poet Robert Graves and his early 20th century contemporaries.
We're a pagan group. We're not just out to go to a party or something. We're here to celebrate the solstice. We celebrate all the pagan festivals of the year. And it's just that the business with Stonehenge, which is a favourite place to go to for the celebration of the summer solstice, seems to become an issue really with the police and the state. And they want to stop people going there. And they try to pretend that the only reason people want to go there is to have some sort of boozed up party or something, and ignore the fact that there's a huge growth of pagan ideas and magical practice in Britain, and that people have a feeling, a deep need to go to these places and get outside of the cities and celebrate in the old ways, or at least as far as we're able to discover what that is.
In 1992, with the passing of Graham Bright's Fixed Penalties Act, and whilst the CJB itself was going through its early stages of formulation, a similar campaign of harassment was unleashed upon members of the Spiral tribe in the wake of the Castle Morton affair. Once again, huge quantities of police resources were specifically targeted at a few individuals who in countries such as France, Spain or India would have been permitted to organise outdoor events in exactly the same kind of genre, free of the kind of heavy-handed molestation that was being meted out to these so-called troublemakers by a government that had put so many of them on the dole to start with, and in spite of clear evidence that there never was a chance of conspiracy.
It's a really brief future for the tribe.
We don't look into the future, we don't plan things, we just follow the vibe. We follow the vibe.
Go with the moment.
Yeah. Number 23s, and they lead you right there.
Now, offer as much as we can away.
The time's always now.
And in spite of establishment claims to the contrary, the event at Castle Morton itself had come about simply because the Spiral tribe convoy had nowhere else to go. Put simply, the principal crime that the Spiral tribe had committed was in organising a free festival along exactly the same lines as the one that had formerly been enacted at Stonehenge, albeit with a slightly different style of music and a slightly different style of clothing, but nevertheless with the same unconstrained, unblinkered, free-thinking and all-embracing mindset. Although the Conservative Party propaganda apparatus had always attempted to use Spiral Tribe's loud and often raucous style of music as one of their principal justifications for the ultimate crackdown on this entire musical genre that was to ensue as a direct result of the passing of the CJB, it is universally acknowledged fact that Blake's Jerusalem, the very song that has now been adopted as the unofficial Tory party anthem, by drunken concert-goers at the annual last night of the proms was every bit as subversive to the government of the early Regency period. One aspect of the intergenerational nature of the suppression of the Stonehenge Free Festival and the campaign to hunt down and ultimately jail the supposed organisers of Castle Morton was the cross-fertilisation between both scenes. Amongst the numerous up-and-coming underground DJs who were to receive some well-deserved attention in some of my own underground videos were Jesse and Rena, the legendary shamanic DJs. As those who have seen the original ITN footage of the Battle of the Beanfield will recall, many of those who were to find themselves subjected to a vicious and over-heavy-handed assault upon their property and their persons by Wiltshire Constabulary as part of Operation Solstice were innocent children who sat powerless as their parents' buses, caravans and mobile homes were smashed to pieces around them. And in among the young and innocent faces whose voices were never to be heard in the aftermath of the violent and draconian crackdown were those of Jesse and Rena, whose own ideas and opinions, caught on film back in March of 1994, just before the CJB was itself to come into force, seem as relevant to today's young people as they were when they themselves were still in their teens. With the land use, the viability of agriculture and agricultural sustainability in general under continued scrutiny, Jesse and Rena were amongst an earlier generation of vegetarians, conscious of the dangers to human health of supposedly scientific methods of agricultural mass production.
We don't eat meat not because we don't want to, but because of things like mad cow disease and
they found a herd of cows the other week with AIDS.
AIDS?
Yeah, mate. Did you read the paper?
In a farm in Gloucestershire.
What paper was that?
Seriously?
The Independent.
Independent.
Gosh, it must
AIDS.
be true then.
And they're all calflings as well, so you don't realise, do you? Until about 5 years later.
So that's why.